Welcome, everybody. I am Jay Rosenthal. That is Tony Repanich. Tony, thank you for being
Okay.
here. I would say never a dull moment, but it really didn't get dull. It got the opposite of dull, I guess, at the end of December. And we wanted to connect with you to kick things off in 2026 and see what, I don't know, the possibility of furthering rescheduling, which seems to be further along than maybe it was before December, means for the industry. Check in with what you're hearing and seeing. Get your expert advice. Can we do that on this early January day?
Absolutely. Looking forward to catching up.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. And then over the holidays, I started thinking that nothing has happened since the announcement that the president made in mid-December. And what does that mean? And then people are going to start getting very antsy. But then, of course, world events took over. And so you and I and the cannabis industry began antsy, but it doesn't mean it's the most important thing happening in Washington. But I want to start here. Looking ahead to 2026, if cannabis is formally operating at some point this year in a post rescheduling world, what do you think fundamentally changes? And I guess what doesn't, both for operators and importantly for this conversation, financial institutions?
Well, I think the biggest win out of this is going to be the change in 280E, and that's going to have a huge impact on the industry in terms of their cash flow. And bankers, we like cash flow to repay loans, so I think it changes the equation in terms of the bankers' appetite to lend to this industry. Some certainty around that. I know some operators have been allocating or calculating their tax amount that's due, but maybe not remitting. Others have been more aggressive in their tax strategy. So I think clarity around all of this will be really important for the industry overall and for financial institutions' relationships with those licensed operators. As far as the administration goes and making their big announcement, and I think we know this administration does tend to like the announcement sometimes more than some of the details. There's a lot of details still to be worked out. And it's funny, I was talking to somebody the other day and they're like, well, it's rescheduled. And I'm like, no, they gave the instructions to reschedule. There's still the work still has to be done. So there's lots of work to do.
Yeah, there's lots of work to do. And I've learned even over the past couple of years that there are very few people that are expert in the internal workings of like the DOJ and the DEA and HHS and all of the things that would need to happen to like mechanically reschedule anything from 1 to 3. So it's there aren't a ton of experts on this, but what is clear is that it's not as fast as anybody on this side of the table would maybe want. And we talked sort of about 280E. And do you think as being sort of one of the big unlocks with rescheduling were it to happen, but do you think, and I don't think it's overnight, but do you think that would unlock more lending because there would be more cash flow for the businesses? Is that the only unlock, or is it like there still would be businesses that won't be scheduled for loans because they're just either too new, the regulatory environment's not right, maybe they're in a state where different regulatory environments exist above and beyond what's happening? Like, is that the big unlock, or is there other things that need to happen in addition to rescheduling for businesses to really unlock, and banks especially, to unlock sort of lending?
Well, I mean, I think you still have the fundamental problem of just the economics in certain states of how licensing has occurred. And this doesn't correct that. It may ease some of the pain, but if you have a state that is vastly oversupplied in cultivation and the price per pound continues to go down, this doesn't change that problem for those licensed operators and still causes the banker to wonder about the credit worthiness of that organization. What this might do, however, is it might actually speed up some of the M&A activity that we've seen in the industry. Those that are in sort of a winning position may use this as an opportunity to consolidate. I think the other thing that I'm thinking about is this sort of confluence of events, which is you have what's happening on the hemp side and how that might get folded back into state cannabis and what the economics of that might be. And so I think there's a lot of forces all working at the same time. And for our bankers, part of it is like, we want more details. We're trying to read the tea leaves here of what's happening, but there's a lot of competing things happening all at the same time.
And I actually want to ask that question, like, bankers reading tea leaves, like, are they actively saying, here, we have to prepare for what a rescheduled world looks like? Or a hemp ban or hemp being re-rolled into some other regulatory framework? Or is it really like, let's wait and see what happens in Washington? We don't want to allocate people, resources, time in our mind and mind space to actually think about what this would mean. Is it a little step by step, or are different banks in different places and sort of how they think about this?
So being a banker for 25 years, when there's uncertainty, our gut position is to stand back and wait for there to be more certainty.
Right, right. That's fair.
So I think for some, it's, yeah, we're keeping close tabs on this, but if they were thinking about being more aggressive in certain areas, it's given them a little bit of pause to say, well, I want to understand better how all these come together. There still could be some sort of grand compromise on the hemp pieces, so we don't know exactly where that's going. It's a big industry, and there's lots of people with money that care about that industry. And in fact, some bankers were more comfortable with hemp given what happened under the Farm Bill, and that's kind of being upended now. So I think depending on where your exposure is as a banker, you're evaluating all of those different component pieces, but it slows down progress in terms of being more aggressive in the space. Our bankers, though, who bank some of the best operators in the country, are talking really closely with those management teams about their plans, what levers they may pull if they go in certain directions. And there is for those bankers that understand this space, they want to find ways to support these businesses, but they're not going to take undue risk in doing so.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think I've asked you this a number of times with every sort of regulatory thing that gets dangled out there. Like, will we see rescheduling happens? Will there be a massive influx of the rest of the banks and credit unions that aren't currently banking cannabis to get in? Or is it more, these 700-800 banks are very comfortable with it. They've been in a long time. We may see some up and down, but do you expect a rush into the space from banks who aren't currently banking, certainly cannabis or hemp?
I don't think so. Here's why. You mentioned that 700 or 800 number. That's those that have filed some sort of SAR under that marijuana SAR guidance that was put in the 2014 FinCEN guidance. What we know is there's really only about 235 financial institutions actively banking the space. Those others just had some sort of exposure and filed a SAR. They're not active participants. So you've still got a very small subset of banks. You're still going to have a big conflict between federal law and state activities. Most of the cannabis activity that happens across the country is in the adult use market. Last time I checked, there's nothing on the Controlled Substances Schedule 3 that's recreational use. It may be used recreationally, but not legally. So we're still going to have some.
It's one of those wait and see.
One of those wait and sees. Where I think we're looking for guidance from the administration is one from the IRS, really codifying that this will take care of the 280E issue. But then also other agencies. You mentioned HHS as one, and FDA. Those will be interesting how they approach this. I'm also looking at SBA. Will they say, well, now that Schedule 3, we would allow SBA loan guarantees? That would be big for the industry and big for bankers who often shore up weaknesses in credit for businesses that are newer in their evolution with SBA guarantees. USDA also provides loan guarantee programs across the country. They were doing that on the hemp side. What happens there? And does this now possibly extend into cannabis for loan guarantees? So I think there's lots of interesting things that we could see guidance from the administration, because now they're going to be asked those explicit questions at the agency level. Before they could just say, well, it was Schedule 1, hands off. Now they're going to have to be more nuanced in their answers.
Yeah, nuance upon nuance upon nuance across the federal government of what it actually means. And I think to go back to what you said, but I think we all know, is that announcements often trump, sorry, the pun, actual. Certainly this one, not just this administration, but others as well, to be fair, about what it actually means. And my guess is you've been in the industry, you understand it really well. You've probably given deeper thought to some of these things than folks in government oftentimes, because they haven't looked at every ramification up and down, because certainly the current administration, not deep into the weeds on some, sorry, another pun, not deep into the weeds on a lot or some of these things. But that leads to what we're going to be doing next week. We had a webinar scheduled. I apologize for the technical difficulties. We have a good group of people coming. We're going to be talking about this exact thing next week. Really, what does change with rescheduling as it relates to banks and banking and financial institutions? But I also think it's going to be important to think about it from a operator perspective, like how to get ready for what might be rescheduling. Like, I mean, I think it's a great time to be having this conversation because of all the nuance you just talked about.
Yeah, I mean, every stakeholder has to really think about what this means and how to plan for it, and to be able to pivot quickly, because as the administration does make decisions, people are going to want to make the best possible business decisions, whether the operator or the financial institution. And I'm sure even state governments are taking a close look at this, especially when you compile the hemp piece into the discussion. So I think we'll have a really great discussion next week with some of our panelists. Yeah, I'm a little bummed it got delayed, but actually it's given us more time to give thought to all the different touch points that this rescheduling will impact. And luckily, as you mentioned before, the administration's been a little busy the last few days, so they've been working on it.
By the time we do the webinar, they may have taken over another country or two. At least if they get, I hope not, but I'm in one. I think they do want to take over. Here we have oil.
First state, aren't you?
Yeah, sure. We have oil. Come get it. No, I'm kidding. Don't take that as an invitation, please, Trump administration. But it is interesting that there is so much. I mean, it's interesting that there's interest around this. But I think what is clear is that everybody is thinking about what it means, right? And like to their own individual business, to the industry overall. Even in the past week, we've seen. You mentioned M&A activity. We saw, I think, maybe the two biggest edibles brand become one. They will, I think, I'm looking at some data, they'll be the number one edibles brand in every market they are both in under this new deal between Gron and Wild acquiring Groon. I keep pronouncing it wrong. But it is interesting. I think we often think about M&A as huge companies who are successful taking over some distressed assets in many cases. But in this case, it's strength, strong becomes stronger.
Right.
And I think that is also an interesting that we often don't talk about is winning brand sort of compiling. And I think MSOs are going to start to realize that they may be strong operators across state lines. Some of the brands that are winning are really winning, state by state, and are actually smaller operators. And I think there's really some interesting things that are going to happen. But again, unlocked by the situational, by the situation in DC, and by maybe access to capital as well. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to unpack there, and so I'm excited to hear what our other panelists have to say on this issue too, because they touch different parts of the industry. Yeah. And I know that Scott Moskal, that's joining us from Blank Rome, his firm does a lot of M&A work, and are having a lot of these conversations right now. So I'm sure he will provide some very interesting color for us on sort of what's happening behind the curtain.
Yeah. Yeah, and others too. I mean, it is interesting how we see different slices of the sector positioning themselves for 2026, which was going to be a big year anyway, certainly with the hemp conversation. But with the late December conversation around rescheduling, it is really a lot of wheels in motion, which is why it's fun to be in the industry. It's also why it's awful to be in the industry. It's the uncertainty, it's the nuance, it's the sort of thinking about every possible scenario and what it means and doesn't mean, which is why we'll have this webinar next week, which is why it's always great to be joined by you that has such deep history, but also as a banker, you bring a lot to it. So I appreciate the time today, Tony. I appreciate the partnership over the past year and looking ahead as well. And we will see you next week.
I'm looking forward to it. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll catch up next week.
Great. Thanks, everybody. And in the show notes, you will see links to the webinar, how to register, and all of that good stuff. Tony, thanks again. We'll connect with you next week.
Thanks, Jay.
Thanks.